Welcome back. You always have high hopes for the future when you're getting married, but the truth is you never know what's gonna happen. One way to gain some certainty is with a little old thing called a prenup.
Yes, and beyond simply signing the prenup though, there are plenty of things you have to be aware of to make sure you're properly protected. So here to walk us through some of the Prenup 101 is our friend, lawyer Lily Coodin. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So let's dive right in, because this is a juicy topic. So we talk about prenups as a form of protection, but what exactly are they protecting us from?
Yeah, a prenup, also called a marriage contract or a cohabitation agreement if you're not legally married, basically sets out what will happen in the event that your relationship ends. What it is protecting you from is the default legal process that we will follow to divide up all of your things if there is no contract. So if you are legally married, the default is that we look at how much value has been created during your marriage and we equalize it so that both people come out having gained the same amount. If you are not legally married, the default is you leave with whatever you have title to. And it might be a TV, it might be a house, it might be nothing. We don't, in a standard way, equalize the way we do for a marriage. Jeff Bezos, Amazon,
Yes.
famously was said not to have a prenup in his first marriage, and his ex-wife ended up exactly with almost $40 billion of Amazon shares when they got divorced. I'm not saying she didn't deserve it. She was married to Jeff Bezos, like give her some money. But to the extent that you want anything different than the default, you have to enter into a contract.
Okay. So talk about some of the details of things we can protect in a prenup.
Yeah, so often it'll be your assets. So think like bank accounts, investment accounts, if you have a business, if you own property somewhere, all of those things. You will also typically deal with spousal support. You know, you and your partner may have ideas about, you know, we don't think either of us should seek spousal support, or we do, and here's how we want it done. So that will typically go in as well. Pre-marriage assets, these are not generally included in that equalization that we talked about, but still it's a good idea to lay it out because as they increase in value, it can get a little bit murky. And then finally, family property. So if you have, say, a piece of art that has been passed down from, you know, generation to generation, especially if there are kids from a previous relationship, people often want to say specifically, this stays with my family.
All right, well, a lot of people assume prenups are only for the ultra rich. So if you don't have a lot of assets or money, do you still need to have a prenup? Is it still a good idea?
A prenup is still a great idea. Basically, it takes the stress away from the divorce in a period where, you know, often divorces don't happen because your relationship is like going very well, right? Like you're at a point where you're not getting along. If you have a prenup, no matter who you are, it lets you decide what's fair at a time when you're getting along. So that can be really helpful. The other thing is that everyone's assets, everyone's money is, you know, individual to them. They have a plan for it, even if it's not Jeff Bezos' money. So you may have a pension, for example, that you've worked for many years, and it factors into your retirement decisions. And you may say, hey, I think that it's only fair that this pension should be mine and should be excluded from that equalization.
It's so tricky because like a lot of times it's at the beginning of your career, so you're not thinking that far ahead about that. So anyway, what if your life changes or your relationship changes in a way that the prenup didn't lay out or predict? What happens then?
Yeah, and that does happen commonly, especially when people think they're never going to have kids and then they do. So it is very important, as you just said, you've got to think about not just what your life looks like today, but what might it look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and plan for the unplanned. Like, okay, we say we're not going to have kids, but what if we do? The second thing is that if your life veers off course, let's say, 5 years down the road, you see that you're not living the life you both thought you would be, you can always amend a prenup. You can say, here we are, our lived experience tells us we actually do have kids. One of us has taken a step back from their career to care for those kids. Let's amend this contract so that it better reflects the world around us.
Okay. All right, so Lily, here's a question for you. All right, say I meet a Jeff Bezos, right? And I sign that prenup. Can I challenge that prenup after it's been signed?
You can. So there are some ways that it can be challenged. Of course, the default position would be that it is valid, but that in order for that to be true, it has to be validly signed. So the first way you can challenge it is by saying, hey, it actually wasn't validly signed. I was coerced, okay? Or I didn't have independent legal advice. Picture yourself about to walk down the aisle. A lawyer jumps out at you and says, sign this or the wedding's not happening. Happens in many movies that I can picture. But in that case, you might say, you know what, I was really coerced. I had a room full of people, waiting, and I didn't want to cancel my wedding. The other thing is if there hasn't been full and fair disclosure of assets. So maybe you think you've married someone who has one, checking account, but actually there are all these offshore accounts you knew nothing about and you learn about it later. In that case, it wouldn't really be fair. And the third thing is fairness. We look at the fairness of the situation at the time that you sign, but also when it's being enforced. There are cases, an illness, for example, or caring for a family member where one person ends up making no money, and to enforce the contract would be to leave one person with everything and the other person with nothing. In that case, a court might say, this is unfair and we're not going to enforce it.
Okay, so we've talked about the division of assets in a prenup, but what about the division of debt?
Yeah, you can deal with that too. I mean, life is expensive these days. Sometimes people come into a marriage with debt, and sometimes they get into debt during the marriage. For example, one person might decide, I'm gonna go back to school and I'm gonna become a dentist. And dentistry school is very expensive, but it also leaves the person who goes to dentistry school with very high earning potential. There's nothing worse than paying for your spouse to go to dental school and then, you split and you're left with half the debt. So in that case, you may decide in advance, you're going to own that debt and you're going to earn, you're going to own the earning potential. And if everything stays the same, we'll both benefit. But if not, that debt should be yours.
All right, so is there anything that the prenup can't cover?
There are a couple of things. So the first one is kids. When it comes to custody, when it comes to child support, courts like to have oversight over that because they always want to make sure that they're doing what's in the best interest of the children. And when you're drafting one of these contracts, like you may not even have kids, you don't know what's in the best interest of the children yet. And then the other thing is the matrimonial home. So this is for people who are legally married. The house that you share has special protections. So even if you owned the house prior to the marriage, the value is going to be split unless you decide otherwise. So you have to make sure that you're thinking about how you're dividing up the value, but also both parties have a right to possess the house. They both have a right to be in the house. So that can't be addressed in a prenup.
Lily, we love having you on here. It's always fascinating and insightful. Thank you so much for this.
Great stuff.
Hey, you, come a bit closer. We've got so many more must-see interviews, spicy debates, lifestyle tips, and pop culture moments. So subscribe to our channel by tapping the logo below and don't miss out.